Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hello, ghoul friends, those who are freaky chic, fans of the supernatural, and all things spooky. I'm your host, FandomTraveller87, and welcome back to my channel. This is another episode in my Spooked series where I tell my very own original ghost stories. Now this one is called The Legend of Jack-o'-lantern Joel. I hope that you enjoy. And of course, I want to thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get all notifications for future uploads. And if you have your very own original story that you would love to share with me, please go to my email and contact me directly at hopegivesyouvings.com@gmail.com. Especially if perhaps you have a true horrifying experience that you'd love to share, maybe something paranormal related, or you just have a creepypasta of your very own that you would love for me to narrate on my next video project. Alright, let's dive right back in to this next story. After traveling several miles to the bustling, heavily populated agricultural town of Hollow Brooks County, furthermore, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts, 11-year-old Annie Felch and her 17-year-old brother Aaron are dropped off at their grandparents' 15-acre farm by their aunt and uncle, who at this time are in their mid-40s. The year was 2002, and spooky season had just begun. Annie had brunette hair and pigtails, and wore round, dark-rimmed glasses, dressed in torn blue jeans and red cowgirl boots. Aaron was dressed more goth-like, a white tank top, black baggy pants, chains, and dark makeup, with a black leather jacket. They lost their parents in a tragic fire back in Detroit when Annie was 6 and Aaron was 12, so their aunt and uncle legally adopted them. Their Aunt Doreen, on their mother's side of the family, ran the local bakery in town, while her husband, Uncle Henry, had owned the hardware store and worked longer shifts. Doreen rolled down the passenger window as she was positioned on the left across from her husband that was driving the pickup truck. She looked at both kids with a warm, patient smile and leaned in closer as their gazes locked. "I want you both to behave for Granddaddy and Grandmama, all right?" Aunt Doreen had chirped with hopeful eyes. "I know this arrangement has been difficult for y'all, but your uncle and I have had to pick up some extra shifts since staffing has been reduced and labor has been high. I'll call you to check up on you after supper, but if you need anything at all, call only if it's an emergency. After we are through with work tonight, me and your uncle are going to be out of town, probably only just for a few weeks. I'm sure you both are well aware that your great Aunt Lou hasn't been physically able lately. Not like she used to be, of course. And she's very sick and we need to look after her. We will reach out if there's any changes to the current plan, but I don't need y'all to worry too much about that. We love you and you have a good time. Bye-bye now." With that, their uncle started up the engine and they sped off down the road. Annie turned to her brother, seemingly nervous about meeting their grandparents for the first time in a long time since their parents' funeral. "Hey, Aaron, are you alright?" she asked, approaching him slowly, but not wanting to invade his personal bubble. Aaron wasn't exactly sociable that much, not really the approachable type, considering how withdrawn and reserved he seemed, only muttering a whatever pretty frequently. He preferred isolation and wasn't a people person, liked keeping to himself. Sure, he had a good job and it paid well, and he had a driver's license, but personality-wise, he wasn't spontaneous, nor a party guy by any means. Rebellious in terms of running away, avoiding, and lashing out, absolutely. But for the most part, he was an okay kid, just had a bad temper, especially when he was pushed too far. He made no eye contact with his sister, He shrugged and just muttered something under his breath, the usual snarky reply of saying, "Whatever." Annie just sighed and carried their luggage up to the front porch, while Aaron just dragged his feet along the gravel. Soon they were greeted by a cheery, shrill voice, their 78-year-old grandmother Phyllis, who hugged them both and helped them inside, having opened the screen door. Their 82-year-old grandfather Joseph had been sitting in his rocking chair, reading the newspaper when he heard his wife and grandkids walk in. He beamed up, slowly rising out of his chair and grabbing his cane. He had a limp in his left ankle that he was born with. Annie embraced her grandpa, while Aaron awkwardly just stared for a moment, cradling himself before looking away. Phyllis noticed this, frowning a bit, rather concerned about his behavior. She had just entered the kitchen and carefully pulled out her delicious homemade apple cinnamon pie out of the oven, with her mitts that were decorated with cats. Grandma Phyllis had 3 cats, one that was a black and white tabby, the other a calico, and the other a Persian. They were all female, all just under a year old, and Annie had helped raise them. Phyllis looked over to her husband, and with a slight head tilt, she silently gestured for him to strike up a conversation with Aaron. Grandpa Joseph cleared his throat and turned to Aaron, holding out his hand for him to shake. Aaron groaned softly, reluctantly taking the old man's hand, only to flinch startled when his grandfather squeezed the boy's hand a little too hard. He quickly snatched his hand away and took a step back. Grandpa Joseph sighed, scratching the back of his head sheepishly.
"Sorry, bud. Guess I didn't know my own strength. Anyway, it's so nice to see you again. How are you two doing with the move?"
Annie had sat down on the sofa and picked up the calico, who rubbed its body against the girl's feet. She stroked its head gently. "It's been all right, I guess. These 6 months I've gotten used to my new school, and I have made some friends." Grandma Phyllis walked over and began serving slices of pie. She placed a plate in front of Aaron, who sat on the opposite side of the room, but he shuffled further away, pouting in protest.
"Well, ain't that lovely? You two must be exhausted after visiting your dad's distant relatives back in Detroit. I've gotten a call from Principal Withers at your school, Anne. She just recently announced preparations for the big Harvest Festival, and she was wondering if you were interested in participating this year."
"Oh yeah, I almost forgot," said Annie. "I'm thinking of volunteering to host the haunted corn maze."
"Well, the position is still open as of yesterday. I can drive you down to City Hall later after dinner."
"What about you, Aaron?"
inquired Grandma Phyllis, who took a bite of her pie. Aaron just shrugged his shoulders once more and rolled his eyes annoyed, snorting a little. "Who cares about some stupid festival?" he spat. "Aaron?" Annie said, gritting her teeth, seemingly embarrassed by her brother's attitude. Aaron always had issues, but who doesn't?
"It's fine, dear,"
reassured Grandma Phyllis.
"Anyway, I figured we could order pizza and wings."
"Finally,"
muttered Grandpa Joseph.
"I'm sick and tired of eating what the cows eat."
"You know we've had to cut down on the carbs,"
said his wife.
"Doctor's orders, your blood pressure, Joe. And honestly, I wish you would take it easy. You work too hard."
"You do what you gotta do to keep bread on the table. If you want the whole loaf, woman, you gotta get your hands dirty and bend over backwards to make dough."
Phyllis sighed, shaking her head and placing her hands on her hips.
"Just remember to take your medication and rest a bit, alright? Another stress-induced heart attack, and it's another trip to the hospital."
"Wait, Grandpa had a heart attack?" Annie exclaimed in a panicked tone.
"Way to go, Phyllis."
scolded Joseph. He then gently turned to Annie.
"It was just a mild one, darling. I'm doing just fine now."
Aaron decided to storm upstairs with his suitcases, and the door slammed shut with a loud bang.
Ugh, that boy needs to respect his elders.
"Well, I agree, but he's a teenager, Joe, and he's been struggling a lot since, the accident."
I miss our daughter and son-in-law too, but it's not like we haven't tried to be present in their kids' lives.
Nobody has ever blamed anyone for anything of the kind, but our daughter has always had her personal demons, and sometimes we can't control nor expect too much of somebody, that carry too much on our shoulders. I always said she'd come to us when she was ready.
Joseph huffed, looking over to Annie. This probably wasn't the best conversation to have with a kid present.
I'm sorry. You kids have been through so much, and I know this is a touchy subject.
It's okay, Gramps, said Annie. I don't blame you. Mom and Dad never really liked the idea of me and Aaron coming to see you and Grandma Phyllis because of some bad blood within the family. But I really begged them to, because I know you two never did anything wrong. Phyllis's heart sunk. Grandma Phyllis decided to quickly change the subject to something else.
Well, I'll place the phone order, and the food should be here within a half an hour. Annie, be a dear, please, and set the table.
Annie did as she was told. Around 7 p.m., Annie was taken to the city hall to sign up for the volunteer position of hosting the haunted corn maze. Throughout the town, there were numerous decorations, flyers, and people dressed like scarecrows with jack-o'-lantern masks. Hey, Gramps, what's with the... She was definitely curious, but was interrupted by a tall, plump woman, 45 years of age, with long black hair and dark skin. Joe, how are you, old codger? Joseph grimaced uncomfortably when he and his granddaughter were bombarded by the mayor, Mayor Paula Edmund, who by reputation was a bit of a piece of work. Very opinionated, very entitled, very money-hungry, just someone who put on an act to impress the higher class, even if it meant screwing over someone like Joseph and his wife, who contributed a lot to the town.
Paula, what can I do for you?
Oh, I was just making some rounds and inspections. I want to make sure everything is perfect for the Harvest Festival this year. Have you considered my offer?
No, Paula. My wife and I are not selling our businesses to your colleagues. We've been keeping up with the payments as our agreement stated, and quite frankly, I wish you would kindly accept our best efforts and show some gratitude.
No need to be hostile, Joseph. It's my job to keep the town afloat and people in line with the routines and the rules I set in place.
What you are doing is taking terrible advantage of me and Phyllis. I've done a lot of favors for you and your family. Your father owes me $2,000 in damages to my tractor and given me toxic grains and nearly killed one of my prize cows. I cannot afford its medical bills due to your family's negligence and reckless antics. My wife and I have been very stressed, and you should show a bit more compassion.
Relax, will you? My father makes limited income due to his disabilities, and he can only send you what he can afford.
And we also have a contract that you, as his caregiver, if he fails to make a payment, you therefore are liable and responsible to uphold the legal obligation of paying me and Phyllis for damages and other inconveniences, especially ones you are at fault for. It is binding and enforceable, regardless of your father's situation, because not only had me and my wife have been taken advantage of and robbed, but also we have been lied to.
Be grateful I even give you minimal compensation for your services. Grandpa Joseph glared furiously.
$20 just to pay the gas mileage is an insult to injury compared to the financial burden you and your family caused us.
Annie arched an eyebrow curiously. Grandpa Joe, she says concerned, you and Granny aren't going to lose the farm, right? The old man shook his head reassuringly as he stared down at the girl.
Of course not, sweet pea.
He said, patting her head gently.
I would never let that happen. We just had some bad luck is all.
The mayor looked over Annie carefully. I've heard about you and that odd brother of yours, she said. You signed up for the corn maze, I assume? Yes, Annie replied nervously, making direct eye contact. But what do you mean by odd?
Just ignore her, Anne,
Said Grandpa Joseph, ushering them along back to the car. The mayor rolled her eyes annoyed as she watched them hurry along. You heading towards Gallows Gulch? She inquired.
Actually, Paula, we're taking the route through Wailing Willow Creek at the bridge to get back home.
Replied Joseph, appearing a bit uneasy now. The mayor crossed her arms. There was a terrible accident on that road, she said. Best to take a detour. I insist you go through Gallows Gulch. Grandpa Joe, what's Gallows Gulch? Asked Annie. Joseph huffed, sign in defeat.
I'll explain in the car,
he said. Once they left, Annie turned to her grandfather, who shakenly had his hands clutched on the steering wheel as his eyes were glued to the road. Grandpa, what's wrong? She asked. And what's with those people dressed up as?
It's complicated,
replied her grandfather, whose eyes shifted around nervously, clearing his throat.
It's Hollowbrooks County tradition this time of the year for people to poke fun at and make light of 42 decades of tragedies and misfortunes, because most people don't give a hoot about accepting the facts. They just ignore the history. They pretend it didn't happen.
Joseph paused, stopping the car as they eventually reached the old ruins of the abandoned western town of Gallows Gulch that succumbed to age and neglect for so long. Annie stared at the remnants of the eerie buildings with broken windows and chipped paint. She listened silently to the howling wind as crisp leaves danced fluidly on the ground. As Joseph continued,
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
he said,
You are too young to know the kind of bad stuff that went on here. I don't want you to be exposed to that garbage. It's too soon. What I will say is, you and Aaron must never come out here. Gallows Gulch is not a place for children. It is a reminder that when you don't tread carefully, when you wander too far, evil will find you. And evil exists in all forms, Anne. It doesn't have to walk and breathe like you and me.
Annie didn't want to press the subject further. She figured her grandfather had his reasons. So perhaps it was better to leave things buried in the past. A few days later, riding her bike after school over to the malt shop, she was greeted by Mrs. Applegate, a friend of her grandmother's. A woman in her 30s, a blonde with a warm and bubbly personality. The owner of the malt shop helped the girl over to a booth and took her order. Some time passed, and as Annie ate her burger and fries, two young boys, 11 years old, twin brothers Roy and Floyd, came running in, stumbling around in their panic, yelling and screaming. Their mother, Jenna Applegate, hurried from the kitchen as Roy and Floyd caught the attention of other patrons and the rest of the staff. There were mixed reactions. Some looked annoyed, rolling their eyes, and some looked very concerned. Kids, what's going on? Exclaimed their mother. The ginger, short-haired twin brothers, with their baby blue eyes, took a breath and exhaled calmly before blurting out, There's a ghost! Jenna huffed, pinching the bridge of her nose. She shook her head in disbelief. Not this again, Jenna Applegate scolded, shooting an unamused, icy-cold glare at her sons, crossing her arms. I cannot afford to deal with ridiculous tall tales. I'm trying to run a business. You boys keep pulling dangerous and cruel pranks. There is no jack-o'-lantern Joel. Now go home and get to studying. You both have a math test tomorrow. Annie knew that the Applegate boys reputably liked scaring the locals, primarily setting up explosives to destroy crops, specifically pumpkins. And they were also known to have an imaginative way of spinning the truth, colorfully embellishing details to fit their narrative. I'm sorry you had to hear all that, said Mrs. Applegate to the customers in the room. My boys can be quite a handful. They tend to over-exaggerate. Moments later, after paying for her meal, Annie ran after Roy and Floyd, following them to the local cemetery on her bike. Hey guys, got a minute? She called out. Oh, it's you, grumbled Roy, sizing her up. What do you want? I was wondering if you both could tell me about this jack-o'-lantern Joel, Annie said boldly. Honestly, why would you care? Chimed in Floyd dismissively. Look, Princess, said Roy, you don't want to know, okay? But trust us, they both said insistently. You do not want to know. Annie made her way back to her grandparents' farm. The name Jack-o'-lantern Joel played in her mind. Who was he? And what was his significance to this town?